When the Great Depression hit America in 1929, millions of families suddenly found themselves struggling to put food on the table. Out of this desperate time emerged an unlikely hero, the dirty sandwich. This humble creation might turn your stomach today, but during the nation's darkest economic period, it literally kept people alive. Simple, affordable, and made from whatever ingredients families could scrape together, the dirty sandwich and its many variations became survival food for countless Americans. From rural farms to urban tenements, these makeshift meals represented both the hardship of the era and the remarkable ingenuity of ordinary people determined to feed their families. Let's explore how these seemingly unappetizing sandwiches saved millions and what they tell us about survival during America's greatest economic crisis. The original dirty sandwich. The dirty sandwich earned its unappealing name from its appearance, but for millions of Americans during the Depression, it was a lifeline. At its most basic, this sandwich consisted of lard or vegetable shortening spread on bread, sprinkled with salt and pepper. The dark specks of pepper against the white lard created the dirty appearance. For countless families, this simple creation was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. Parents could feed their children for just pennies, as lard was substantially cheaper than butter, meat, or cheese. Children would take these sandwiches to school, often hiding them from classmates to avoid embarrassment over their family's circumstances. In rural areas, home-rendered lard was used, while urban families purchased small amounts of shortening when they could afford it. The sandwich required no refrigeration, making it practical for homes without electricity or iceboxes, a common situation during the Depression. What's remarkable is that despite its simplicity, the dirty sandwich provided crucial calories and fat that helped prevent malnutrition. For growing children especially, these calories made the difference between development and stunted growth in a time when 1 in 5 American children was malnourished. Today, nutritionists would be horrified at serving children bread coated with lard as a meal, but during the Depression, this humble creation saved countless lives when the alternative was often nothing at all. Lard and sugar sandwich. A slightly more appealing variation of the dirty sandwich was the lard and sugar sandwich, which became a treat for children during the hardest years of the Depression. This version replaced pepper with a sprinkle of sugar, creating a primitive sweet sandwich that offered both calories and comfort. Mothers would spread a thin layer of lard on bread and then sprinkle whatever sugar the family could afford, sometimes just a few granules, to create what they would call a dessert sandwich for special occasions. The contrast between the bland fat and sweet sugar created a flavor somewhat reminiscent of simple pastry. In some households, this sandwich was reserved for birthdays or holidays when no proper treats could be afforded. Children would look forward to these special occasions, not realizing that their celebration meal was born of extreme poverty rather than tradition. The psychological impact of these sweet sandwiches shouldn't be underestimated. They allowed parents to provide a semblance of normalcy and occasional indulgence despite devastating financial circumstances. Children who received these sandwiches often remembered them decades later, not for their culinary merit, but as symbols of their parents' efforts to create moments of joy amid hardship. The original dirty sandwich, this sweet variation, provided essential calories when more nutritious foods were simply unattainable, helping families survive until their circumstances improved. Ketchup sandwich. When the lard ran out and families faced truly desperate times, the ketchup sandwich became a last resort for many. This creation consisted simply of bread with ketchup spread between the slices, a meal born of absolute necessity rather than culinary inspiration. Ketchup was relatively affordable and had a long shelf life, making it a staple in many Depression-era pantries. A single bottle could provide filling for sandwiches over several days, making it an economical choice for large families with little income. The sandwich provided some vitamin C from the tomatoes in the ketchup, along with calories from the sugar content. While nutritionally inadequate as a regular meal, it helped stave off hunger pangs when nothing else was available. Children sometimes brought these sandwiches to school, where they became markers of extreme poverty. Some teachers reported students eating ketchup sandwiches day after day, prompting early school lunch assistance programs in some communities. The ketchup sandwich also appeared in urban breadlines and soup kitchens when donations were low and resources stretched thin. Charity workers would prepare hundreds of these sandwiches to distribute when more substantial food wasn't available. This humble creation represented the absolute bottom rung of Depression-era nutrition, a last defense against starvation that, despite its inadequacy, helped countless Americans survive another day during the nation's worst economic crisis. Mayonnaise sandwich. Slightly higher on the economic ladder than the ketchup sandwich was the mayonnaise sandwich, another single-ingredient creation that became a staple for struggling families. Simply made with bread and a spread of mayonnaise, this sandwich was one step above its ketchup counterpart. Mayonnaise offered more calories and fat than ketchup, making it a more sustaining option when available. Some families made their own from scratch when they could access eggs and oil, creating a small amount that would be carefully rationed throughout the week. In homes where chickens were kept, homemade mayonnaise represented a way to transform eggs into a spread that could be stretched across multiple meals. The oil provided essential fats, while the eggs contributed some protein to an otherwise carbohydrate-heavy diet. Urban families who couldn't produce their own ingredients might save for a small jar of commercial mayonnaise, using just a thin scraping to make it last as long as possible. Some shops sold broken or damaged jars at reduced prices, making them accessible to families on extremely tight budgets. Like other minimal sandwiches of the era, mayonnaise sandwiches were often disguised or given creative names to preserve children's dignity. Parents would call them cream sandwiches or white sandwiches, avoiding terms that highlighted their family's financial struggles. These simple creations helped bridge the gap between more substantial meals, providing enough energy to get through school or work days when more nutritious options weren't available. Sugar sandwich. The sugar sandwich represented both extreme deprivation and parents' desperate attempts to provide something special for their children during the Depression. This creation consisted simply of bread with a sprinkling of sugar between the slices, sometimes moistened with a few drops of water to help the sugar adhere. In many households, sugar was carefully rationed as a precious commodity. Using it in a sandwich rather than as a cooking ingredient was a way to let children enjoy its sweetness directly. The immediate energy boost from the sugar also helped hungry children feel temporarily satisfied. Some families would save their sugar ration specifically to make these sandwiches for Sunday dessert or as a special treat during difficult weeks. The contrast between the plain bread and sweet sugar created a simple pleasure in otherwise monotonous diets. Variations emerged based on what families could access. Those with cinnamon might add a light dusting for what they called cinnamon toast sandwiches. In areas where molasses was more affordable than granulated sugar, a thin spread of molasses replaced the sugar sprinkles. School teachers from the era reported that sugar sandwiches were common lunchbox items, especially toward the end of the month, when family funds ran low. Some schools began keeping sugar on hand to supplement the plain bread that children brought when families couldn't afford anything to put on it. These simple, sweet sandwiches highlight the lengths to which parents went to provide moments of joy for their children, even when their resources were stretched to the breaking point. Onion sandwich. The onion sandwich represented a step up from the most basic Depression-era creations, adding flavor and some nutritional value to the daily bread. This sandwich consisted of thin slices of raw onion between bread, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt if available. Onions were among the most affordable vegetables during the Depression. Many families grew them in backyard gardens, and their long storage life made them available year-round. A single onion could provide filling for several sandwiches, making it an economical choice for large families. Despite its simplicity, the onion sandwich provided some nutritional benefits. Onions contain vitamin C and various minerals that were often lacking in Depression-era diets. The strong flavor also made plain bread more satisfying and helped disguise the taste of stale or low-quality bread that many families had to use. Regional variations emerged based on local preferences and available ingredients. In the South, Sweet onions were preferred when in season. In immigrant neighborhoods, different seasonings might be added. Paprika in Hungarian areas or oregano in Italian communities if someone had a tiny herb garden. Some families would supplement the onion with a thin scraping of lard or drippings when available, adding calories and helping to mellow the raw onion's sharpness. Others would lightly toast the bread if they could afford the fuel to heat a stove. This humble sandwich demonstrates how Depression-era families found ways to add flavor and nutrition to their diets using the most affordable ingredients available, turning necessity into a meal that provided both sustenance and satisfaction. Now, if you've been finding this journey through Depression-era survival foods fascinating, consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Your membership helps us research these forgotten chapters of American food history that show the incredible resilience of previous generations. Now let's continue exploring how these humble sandwiches sustained millions through America's darkest economic crisis. Bread and butter pickle sandwich. For families fortunate enough to have garden space, the bread and butter pickle sandwich represented self-reliance during the Depression. This creation featured homemade bread and butter pickles, thinly sliced cucumbers, preserved in a vinegar solution with sugar and spices between slices of bread. Home gardens became critical food sources during the Depression, with cucumbers being relatively easy to grow in many climates. Families would harvest cucumbers in summer and preserve them as pickles for year-round use, creating a sandwich filling that lasted through winter when fresh vegetables were unavailable. The sweet-sour flavor of bread and butter pickles made them particularly appealing as sandwich fillings, especially for children who might resist other preserved vegetables. The crisp texture also added interest to the soft bread, creating a more satisfying eating experience. The bread and butter name itself reflected the economic reality of the Depression. These pickles were considered substantial enough to serve as the filling between bread, replacing costlier protein sources like meat or cheese. They quite literally took the place of butter in many sandwiches. Rural families often shared cucumber harvests and pickle-making knowledge, helping neighbors preserve their own garden produce. Community canning days became social events where resources and equipment were pooled to create winter food supplies. This sandwich represents how home food production and preservation became essential survival strategies during the Depression, allowing families to create more varied and flavorful meals than they could afford to purchase. Dandelion sandwich. The dandelion sandwich exemplified how Depression-era families turned to foraged foods when money for groceries ran out. This surprisingly nutritious creation featured young dandelion greens, harvested from yards and parks, served between slices of bread, sometimes with a light spread of lard or vinegar to cut the bitterness. Children were often sent out with paper bags to collect young dandelion leaves before they flowered, when they were most tender and least bitter. This activity combined food gathering with free entertainment for youngsters, who often made games of who could collect the most greens. What most families didn't realize was that they were consuming a nutritional powerhouse. Dandelion greens are rich in vitamins A and C, as well as iron and calcium, nutrients often lacking in Depression-era diets heavy in starches and fats. These wild greens provided crucial nutrition at a time when fresh vegetables were luxury items. Urban families foraged in parks and vacant lots, while rural families gathered dandelions from fields and roadsides. In some communities, Italian, Greek, and Eastern European immigrants shared traditional knowledge about preparing wild greens, teaching their neighbors which plants were edible and how to reduce bitterness. Some variations included mixing the dandelions with wild onions or other foraged greens like chickweed or lamb's quarters. If available, a small amount of bacon fat might be added for flavor, or an egg might be used to make a simple dressing. The dandelion sandwich represents the resourcefulness of a generation that survived by recognizing that nutritious food doesn't always come from a store. Sometimes it's growing freely in your own backyard. Bacon grease sandwich. The bacon grease sandwich was a variation of the dirty sandwich that added more flavor while still using extremely economical ingredients. This creation consisted of saved bacon grease spread like butter on bread, sometimes with salt, pepper, or other seasonings if available. During the Depression, bacon was a luxury many families could rarely afford. When they did splurge on a small amount for Sunday breakfast, every drop of the rendered fat was carefully saved in a jar kept at room temperature. This precious substance would then be used throughout the week as a flavor enhancer and sandwich spread. The smoky, meaty flavor of bacon grease made plain bread much more appealing and satisfying. Children who had sandwiches made with this spread often felt less deprived than those with plain lard, as the familiar bacon flavor created the illusion of eating meat. In rural areas where some families raised their own pigs, bacon grease was more readily available. These families sometimes shared their precious bacon drippings with less fortunate neighbors, creating community bonds through food sharing. Some regional variations included adding a thin slice of onion, a sprinkle of cornmeal for texture, or mixing the bacon grease with a small amount of flour to create a paste that would spread further and feed more people. The bacon grease sandwich demonstrates the extreme care Depression-era families took to utilize every possible food resource. Nothing was wasted when people were literally scraping by from one meal to the next. Ketchup and relish sandwich. When families had access to just a few condiments, the ketchup and relish sandwich represented a step up from single-ingredient creations. This sandwich combined two common condiments, ketchup and sweet pickle relish, to create a more complex flavor profile despite containing no actual protein or vegetables. The sandwich emerged partially from restaurant experiences. People noticed that these condiments were often provided free on tables, and the combination resembled aspects of more expensive foods like hamburgers. Children particularly appreciated these sandwiches because they contained familiar flavors from normal, pre-Depression meals. Some families made special versions for weekends, toasting the bread if they could afford to run the stove, creating what parents would sometimes call hamburger sandwiches, though no meat was actually involved. The psychological comfort of foods that reminded children of better times shouldn't be underestimated. Urban families typically used commercial condiments, purchasing the smallest available bottles and using them sparingly. Rural families often made their own relish from garden cucumbers, stretching a summer harvest into year-round sandwich fillings. School lunch programs sometimes provided these sandwiches when donations were limited, recognizing that the combination offered slightly more nutrition than plain bread alone. The natural preservatives in both condiments also meant these sandwiches could safely remain unrefrigerated in lunch pails for hours. The ketchup and relish sandwich represents the creativity Depression-era families employed to create variety in extremely limited circumstances, finding ways to combine the few ingredients available to create new flavors and experiences. Mashed bean sandwich. The mashed bean sandwich represented one of the more nutritious options available to struggling families during the Depression. This creation featured cooked beans, usually navy beans or other affordable varieties, mashed with a small amount of bacon grease or lard and spread between slices of bread. Beans were among the most economical protein sources available during the Depression. A small bag could feed a family for days, and government relief programs often distributed dried beans to struggling households. Home gardeners could also grow certain varieties, creating a sustainable food source. The sandwich provided significant nutritional benefits compared to simpler versions. Beans offered protein, fiber, and various minerals often lacking in Depression-era diets. When combined with bread, they created a more complete protein profile that supported health during difficult times. Preparation typically involved cooking a pot of beans, often with a ham bone or bacon end if available for flavor, then mashing a portion with a fork and adding whatever seasonings were on hand. The mixture would be spread on bread, with any leftover beans served as side dishes for other meals. Regional variations reflected local preferences and available ingredients. In the South, a touch of molasses might be added for sweetness. In areas with Mexican influence, chili powder or pepper might be included for heat. Some families added finely chopped onions when available to enhance flavor. The mashed bean sandwich demonstrates how even in extreme poverty, some families found ways to create relatively nutritious meals that sustained them through the economic crisis, combining affordable ingredients to maximize both nutrition and satisfaction. Creamed salt cod sandwich. The creamed salt cod sandwich represented an economical way to incorporate protein into Depression-era diets, particularly in coastal regions and areas with large immigrant populations familiar with preserved fish. This creation featured rehydrated salt cod mixed with a simple white sauce spread between bread slices. Salt cod had been a staple for generations before the Depression due to its long shelf life without refrigeration. During the economic crisis, its relatively low cost compared to fresh meat made it an important protein source for many families. A small amount could be rehydrated and extended with white sauce to feed an entire family. The basic preparation involved soaking salt cod to remove excess salt, flaking it finely, and mixing it with a sauce made from flour, water, and a small amount of milk if available. Some families added a tiny bit of onion or pepper for flavor when they could get it. In ethnic neighborhoods, particularly Italian, Portuguese, and Scandinavian, salt cod was already a traditional ingredient, and techniques for making it palatable were passed down through generations. These communities often taught others how to prepare this unfamiliar protein source during the hard times. Government nutrition programs sometimes distributed salt cod, along with recipes for stretching it to feed large families. Home economists working with relief programs demonstrated preparation techniques in community centers and through newspaper columns. The creamed salt cod sandwich highlights how traditional preservation methods and immigrant food knowledge became crucial survival tools during the Depression, providing essential protein when fresh foods were unaffordable for most Americans. Cucumber sandwich. The cucumber sandwich took on new significance during the Depression as families with garden space relied heavily on homegrown produce. This simple creation featured thin slices of cucumber between bread, sometimes with a light spread of mayonnaise if available, or just a sprinkle of salt and vinegar. Cucumbers were among the easiest and most productive vegetables for novice gardeners to grow, making them accessible even to urban families with small yard spaces. A few plants could produce enough cucumbers to provide sandwich fillings throughout the summer months. Unlike many vegetables that required cooking, and thus fuel, which cost money, cucumbers could be eaten raw, making them practical for families trying to minimize expenses. Their high water content also helped with hydration during hot summer months when many homes lacked refrigeration. The sandwich offered refreshing crispness and some nutritional benefits, though it was far from a complete meal. The momentary feeling of fullness it provided helped tide family members over between more substantial meals, particularly during summer when garden produce was at its peak. Some families created variations based on what else they had growing. Thinly sliced radishes might be added for extra bite, or a few leaves of lettuce might supplement the cucumber if the garden was producing well. A sprinkle of vinegar helped preserve the cucumber slightly longer and added tanginess. The cucumber sandwich represents how home gardening became a crucial survival strategy during the Depression, with families converting lawns and flower beds into food production spaces that helped supplement extremely limited food budgets. Hot water cornbread sandwich. The hot water cornbread sandwich emerged as a filling meal option, particularly in the rural South, where cornmeal was often more accessible and affordable than wheat flour. This creation featured a piece of hot water cornbread, made simply from cornmeal, boiling water, and salt, split and used as the bread for whatever minimal fillings were available. The basic hot water cornbread required no eggs, milk, or fat in the batter, just cornmeal mixed with boiling water to form a dough that could be shaped into patties and cooked on a griddle with minimal fat. This technique had roots in Native American and early settler cooking, but became essential during the Depression when even basic ingredients were scarce. These cornmeal patties could be split while still warm and filled with whatever was available, perhaps a spoonful of beans, some garden greens, or just a thin scraping of lard or bacon grease. The result was more filling than traditional sandwiches because the cornmeal provided substantial calories. In sharecropping communities where corn was grown, families often had access to cornmeal even when they had little cash. Mills would grind corn for a portion of the meal, allowing families to convert their crop into a stable food source that lasted through winter. Government commodity distribution programs often included cornmeal, making this option accessible even to families without land. Home demonstration agents taught economical cornmeal recipes through extension services, helping families maximize this basic ingredient. The hot water cornbread sandwich demonstrates how regional food traditions were adapted to meet the extreme challenges of the Depression, with traditional techniques being stripped down to their most economical form to stretch limited resources. Tomato sandwich. For families fortunate enough to have garden space, the tomato sandwich represented a seasonal luxury during the Depression. This simple creation featured slices of fresh tomato between bread, sometimes with a light sprinkle of salt and pepper, and a thin spread of mayonnaise if available. Home gardens became critical food sources during the Depression, and tomatoes were among the most valued crops. A well-tended tomato plant could produce pounds of fruit over a growing season, providing fresh food when other options were limited. Seeds could be saved from year to year, making this a self-perpetuating food source. During tomato season, these sandwiches were a welcome change from the bland fare that dominated Depression-era diets. The bright acidity and fresh flavor of ripe tomatoes made even plain bread seem like a treat. Children who had access to tomato sandwiches during summer were considered fortunate compared to those subsisting on lard or condiment sandwiches. The nutritional benefits were significant as well. Tomatoes provided vitamin C and other nutrients often lacking in restricted diets. The fresh fruit helped prevent the nutritional deficiencies that plagued many Americans during this period of extreme hardship. Urban families grew tomatoes in backyard plots, vacant lots, and even container gardens on fire escapes. Community gardens sprang up in many cities, allowing apartment dwellers to grow food for their families. Rural families often grew large quantities, preserving the excess for winter use. The tomato sandwich represents how home food production became a critical survival strategy during the Depression, with seasonal abundance providing brief periods of better nutrition and food quality amid otherwise sparse diets. Peanut butter and pickle sandwich. The peanut butter and pickle sandwich might sound strange to modern tastes, but during the Depression, this unusual combination offered an economical way to add flavor and nutrition to daily meals. This creation paired a small amount of peanut butter with sliced dill pickles between bread slices. Peanut butter had become increasingly popular in America before the Depression, and its relatively high protein content made it valuable during hard times. However, it was still expensive enough that families needed to stretch it. Adding pickles, either home-canned or purchased in bulk, created a more substantial sandwich while using less peanut butter. The flavor combination worked better than might be expected. The salty, vinegary crunch of pickles complemented the creamy, rich peanut butter, creating a more complex taste experience than either ingredient alone. Children often enjoyed this unusual pairing, which became a distinctive food memory for many who grew up during the Depression. Home economists of the era actually recommended this combination in newspaper columns and radio programs focused on economical cooking. They noted that the protein from peanut butter combined with the negligible calories but pleasing crunch and flavor of pickles created a satisfying meal at minimal cost. Some families created variations based on what they had available. Sweet pickles might replace dill for a different flavor profile, or pickle relish might be used instead of slices to make the sandwich easier to eat, especially for younger children. This unexpected sandwich combination demonstrates the creativity and adaptability of Depression-era cooks. who found ways to create satisfying meals by combining limited ingredients in novel ways. Bread and milk sandwich. When bread was stale and other fillings unavailable, the bread and milk sandwich provided a way to create a more substantial meal from the most basic ingredients. This creation featured a slice of bread soaked in milk, often diluted with water to make it stretch further, sprinkled with a tiny bit of sugar if available, and topped with another slice of dry bread. This sandwich emerged from the tradition of bread soups and porridges that had sustained poor families for generations. During the Depression, it became a recognized way to salvage stale bread while creating something that felt more like a proper meal than just plain bread alone. For families with access to milk, either from their own cow or through relief programs, this sandwich provided calcium and some protein, making it more nutritious than many alternatives. The milk softened hard bread that might otherwise be difficult to eat, especially for young children and elderly family members. The sweet version with a sprinkle of sugar was often served as a simple dessert or special breakfast. A savory version might include a dash of salt and pepper instead, sometimes with a tiny bit of onion if available, creating a more lunch-appropriate option. In urban areas where bread lines distributed free or subsidized bread, families would collect whatever was available, often day-old or older, and transform it into these sandwiches to create more filling meals. The milk helped mask the taste of bread that was past its prime. The bread and milk sandwich represents how Depression-era families found ways to transform even the most basic and sometimes unappetizing ingredients into meals that provided sustenance and a sense of normal eating patterns during extraordinarily difficult times. Syrup sandwich. The syrup sandwich provided a quick source of energy and a sweet treat during times when more substantial foods were unaffordable. This simple creation featured whatever syrup was available, often molasses, sorghum, or corn syrup rather than maple, spread between two slices of bread. These syrups were generally more affordable than sugar and had the advantage of being produced domestically in many regions, making them accessible even in rural areas with limited access to grocery stores. Sorghum was particularly common in the South, while molasses was widely available in many regions. The sandwich provided concentrated calories from the carbohydrates in both the bread and syrup, giving immediate energy to hungry children and hard-working adults. While lacking in protein and other nutrients, it helped stave off hunger pangs and provided psychological comfort through its sweetness. Some families reserved these sandwiches for special occasions, creating a sense of treat or celebration with minimal expenditure. Others relied on them as regular lunch items, particularly toward the end of the week when other supplies ran low before payday. Regional variations reflected local preferences and available sweeteners. In areas where maple syrup production was common, a very thin scraping might be used for special occasions. In apple-growing regions, apple butter sometimes replaced syrup, providing a similar sweet experience with some additional nutritional benefits. The syrup sandwich represents how Depression-era families found ways to provide moments of pleasure and normalcy through food, even when their resources were extremely limited, understanding that psychological nourishment was important alongside physical sustenance. Butter and sugar sandwich. For families who occasionally had access to real butter, the butter and sugar sandwich represented a special treat during the Depression. This creation featured a thin spread of butter topped with a sprinkle of sugar between slices of bread, a simple approximation of cake or pastry when such luxuries were unattainable. Butter was expensive and often unavailable during the hardest years, making this sandwich a rare indulgence for most families. Those who kept a cow might have more regular access to homemade butter, but even then, it was often sold rather than consumed to generate much-needed cash income. Parents would sometimes serve these sandwiches for birthdays or holidays when no proper cake could be afforded. The combination of fat and sugar created a satisfying mouthfeel and sweet flavor that provided a brief escape from the monotony of everyday Depression-era meals. Some variations included a sprinkle of cinnamon if available, creating what some families called cinnamon toast sandwiches. Others might add a drop of vanilla extract to the butter for special occasions, enhancing the dessert-like quality of this simple creation. School teachers from the era reported that children who brought these sandwiches were often the envy of classmates, highlighting how standards and expectations had shifted dramatically during the economic crisis. What would have been considered a poor substitute for proper dessert before the Depression became a coveted luxury. The butter and sugar sandwich demonstrates how dramatically circumstances had changed for American families, with simple combinations of basic ingredients becoming special treats during a time when traditional luxuries were completely out of reach for most households. Mustard sandwich. When other condiments ran out, the mustard sandwich became a last resort meal for many struggling families. This creation consisted simply of bread spread with yellow mustard, one of the least expensive and longest-lasting condiments available during the Depression. Mustard had the advantage of being sold in relatively large containers for low prices, making it economical for families on extremely tight budgets. Its strong flavor also helped mask the taste of stale or low-quality bread that many families had to use during the hardest times. While providing minimal nutrition, the sandwich offered some immediate sensory satisfaction through its tangy, spicy flavor, a welcome change from plain bread alone. Children sometimes preferred it to other basic sandwiches because of the distinctive taste. In some regions, mustard sandwiches were associated with the very poorest families, becoming a recognized symbol of extreme hardship. Teachers and social workers sometimes identified children who brought these sandwiches as potentially needing additional assistance. Some families tried to improve the basic mustard sandwich when possible. A thin slice of onion might be added if available, or a sprinkle of salt and pepper to enhance the flavor. Others might add a shaving of cabbage or any garden vegetable available to increase the nutritional value. The mustard sandwich represents the absolute bottom rung of Depression-era food options, a creation born not of culinary inspiration, but of desperate necessity when families had exhausted all other possibilities, but still needed to provide something resembling a meal. Banana sandwich. For fortunate families with occasional access to bananas, the banana sandwich represented a special nutritional boost during the Depression. This creation featured sliced bananas between bread, sometimes with a sprinkle of sugar if available, or a thin spread of peanut butter for those who could afford it. Bananas were relatively expensive during the Depression, but their high energy content and natural sweetness made them a valued addition to limited diets when occasionally affordable. Parents would sometimes save for days to purchase a single banana, which would be carefully sliced and divided among multiple sandwiches to feed an entire family. The nutritional benefits were significant compared to many other sandwich options of the era. Bananas provided potassium, vitamin C, and quick energy from natural sugars, nutrients often lacking in the starch-heavy diets that dominated during hard times. Some families created special variations for birthdays or holidays. A sprinkle of sugar transformed the sandwich into a dessert-like treat, while those who had access to both peanut butter and bananas could create a more substantial meal with better protein content. In some communities, banana sandwiches became associated with Sunday meals or special occasions, creating food traditions that continued long after economic circumstances improved. Children who rarely experienced fresh fruit found these sandwiches particularly memorable. The banana sandwich represents how even occasional access to fresh fruit could significantly improve Depression-era diets, providing both nutritional and psychological benefits during a time when such luxuries were typically out of reach for most American families. Toast sandwich. Perhaps the most stark example of Depression-era food economics was the toast sandwich, a British creation that gained popularity in America during the hardest years of the economic crisis. This unusual sandwich consisted of a slice of toasted bread placed between two slices of untoasted bread, seasoned with just a sprinkle of salt and pepper. The genius of this creation was that it created the illusion of a more substantial meal while using only bread. The contrasting textures, soft outer layers with a crisp center, created interest and a more satisfying mouthfeel than plain bread alone. The small amount of fuel used to toast one slice was more economical than cooking a proper filling. First popularized in Britain during Victorian times as an invalid food, the toast sandwich found new relevance during the Depression when families needed to create meals from the absolute minimum of ingredients. Home economists sometimes recommended it in newspaper columns about stretching food budgets to the extreme. Some families added variations based on available seasonings. A light sprinkle of garlic salt, paprika, or other spices could change the flavor profile. Others might add a thin scraping of butter or drippings to the toast if available, enhancing the flavor and calorie content slightly. While nutritionally limited, the psychological impact of serving a sandwich rather than just plain bread, helped maintain family morale and normal eating patterns during extreme hardship. For children especially, having a proper sandwich for lunch preserved a sense of normalcy. The toast sandwich represents perhaps the ultimate example of Depression-era ingenuity, finding a way to create the impression of a complete meal when ingredients beyond the most basic staple were simply unavailable. Lettuce sandwich. For families with garden space, the lettuce sandwich provided a fresh alternative to condiment-based options during the growing season. This simple creation featured fresh lettuce leaves between slices of bread, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt and vinegar, or a thin spread of mayonnaise if available. Lettuce was among the easiest vegetables for novice gardeners to grow, making it accessible even to urban families with limited space and experience. A small patch could provide fresh greens for sandwiches throughout the spring and early summer, offering a welcome change from preserved and processed foods. The sandwich provided minimal calories but offered some vitamin content and refreshing crispness that was otherwise lacking in Depression-era diets. The high water content of lettuce also helped with hydration during hot months when many homes lacked refrigeration. Some variations incorporated other garden produce when available. A few slices of radish or green onion might be added for extra flavor, or a thin slice of tomato when in season. These additions created more interesting and nutritious meals while still relying primarily on homegrown ingredients. Schools sometimes maintained victory gardens even before World War II, teaching children to grow lettuce and other simple vegetables that could supplement family meals. The produce from these educational gardens often went home with students, providing fresh ingredients for sandwiches and other simple dishes. The lettuce sandwich represents how home gardening became an essential survival strategy during the Depression, with families growing what they could to supplement extremely limited food budgets and provide fresh alternatives to the monotonous preserved foods that dominated during economic hardship. Molasses and butter sandwich. For families with access to both butter and molasses, this sandwich represented a relatively luxurious treat during the Depression. The combination featured a thin spread of butter topped with a drizzle of molasses between slices of bread, creating a sweet meal that provided both quick energy and satisfaction. Molasses was generally more affordable than refined sugar and offered some nutritional benefits, including iron and calcium. In rural areas, particularly in the South, sorghum molasses was produced locally, making it more accessible than store-bought sweeteners for many families. This sandwich was sometimes reserved for Sunday dinner dessert or special occasions, giving family members something to look forward to during otherwise monotonous meal routines. The sweet, rich flavor profile created a treat-like experience with minimal ingredients. Some regional variations included a sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg when available, or a small amount of peanut butter instead of butter in areas where peanuts were grown locally. The sandwich was particularly popular in Appalachia and the rural South, where sorghum production was common. For children with limited exposure to commercial candy or desserts, these sweet sandwiches became treasured treats. Many who grew up during the Depression retained a lifelong fondness for this simple combination, continuing to enjoy it even when more elaborate desserts became accessible. The molasses and butter sandwich demonstrates how Depression-era families found ways to create special meals from basic ingredients, maintaining family traditions and celebrations even in the midst of severe economic hardship. The legacy of Depression sandwiches. The humble sandwiches that sustained millions through America's worst economic crisis left a lasting imprint on a generation. Children who grew up eating these makeshift meals carried the experience with them for life, influencing their attitudes toward food, waste, and economic hardship long after prosperity returned. Many who survived the Depression never lost their habits of extreme frugality. They continued to save bread heels, reuse bacon grease, and approach food with a seriousness that sometimes puzzled their children and grandchildren. The waste not, want not mentality became deeply ingrained, with many unable to discard even small amounts of leftover food decades later. Some of these sandwiches evolved into comfort foods that remained popular even when ingredients for more elaborate meals became affordable again. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, for instance, transcended their Depression-era origins to become American classics, though few today recognize their roots in economic necessity. Perhaps most significantly, these sandwiches represent the incredible resilience and creativity of ordinary Americans faced with extraordinary challenges. Parents who managed to feed their families on pennies a day, often sacrificing their own portions to ensure children had enough, demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness that shouldn't be forgotten. Modern food insecurity initiatives have roots in the lessons learned during this period. School lunch programs, food stamps, and community food banks all evolved from the recognition that hunger affects not just individual families, but society as a whole, a lesson painfully learned during the Depression years. The legacy of these humble sandwiches lives on not just in recipes, but in cultural values about food, waste, community responsibility, and the importance of ensuring that no one goes hungry, even when resources are at their most scarce. It's remarkable how simple combinations of bread and minimal fillings helped millions of Americans survive the darkest period in our economic history. These Depression-era sandwiches weren't just food. They were symbols of incredible human ingenuity and determination to carry on despite overwhelming challenges. The next time you make a sandwich with artisanal bread, premium meats, and gourmet condiments, consider how your grandparents or great-grandparents might have viewed such abundance. For them, a thin smear of lard with salt and pepper was sometimes the difference between going hungry or making it through another day. These humble creations remind us of both how far we've come and how quickly circumstances can change. The generation that survived on dirty sandwiches never forgot the experience, carrying lessons of frugality and resourcefulness throughout their lives. If you enjoyed this glimpse into America's culinary survival history, please like and subscribe for more stories about how our food traditions evolved through challenging times. Thanks for watching.